worldview. Welcome to another episode of Journeys by Steph. Today's guest is a good friend of mine. Her name is Farzeen Ashik. She is the founder of Ascend Consulting. She is a certified ICF life coach and she's an HR consultant. Let's welcome Farzeen. So Farzeen, welcome. Thank you again for being with us on this podcast today. And as you know, this podcast aims to highlight a lot of the intercultural aspects, and we try as much as possible to create that awareness. So I thought it would be a very nice idea if you talk about your experience when it comes to the intercultural world. I mean, you grew up most of your life in India, and then you got married and moved here.
Correct. Yeah.
So, and then I know that there was a Mindshift that was somehow done. So let's start by maybe talking about your general upbringing and how was that like?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Steph. So, yes, you're right. I grew up in India, and I'm an Indian Muslim woman. So there are some additional nuances that come into the picture, right? Because we're Indian, but we're also Muslim. So there's a bit of both. So in terms of upbringing, I would say that I had a fairly strict upbringing, and my parents were very clear about what we could do, what we couldn't do, right from how we dress, for example. So I would have friends who were allowed to wear any kind of clothing, for that matter. It could be short, it could be sleeveless. So, but me being a Muslim, I was not allowed to, for example, wear like short clothes, like nothing above my knees, no arms out. So these things didn't make sense to me then at that point of time, because I was like, you know what, we're all Indian and we're all doing the same thing. But I think religion played a part in bringing about that kind of, changes. So little things here and there.
Okay.
It's kind of, but I realized that it was kind of a blended approach I think they had, because they did have some kind of Arabic influence because of the whole religion aspect.
Correct.
Along with the fact that we were Indian, and Indians as a community, we are more conservative. We aren't as open as, I would say, other cultures. We have a fair amount of judgment going around in terms of, how we do things and so on.
Do you want to highlight on that a bit, or?
Yeah, so we are expected to conform.
Okay.
That's the way we're raised. We're raised to be obedient. So if you're an obedient child, you're a good child. Okay. And performance is very important as well in Indian culture, irrespective of what religious background you belong to. Performance is very, very important in terms of academic performance to a large extent. If you are to kind of show skills in any other area, like music or art or sports, you have to be exceptional in it. It's not enough if you're just good at it. Okay. So generally, we are raised in this environment where you are expected to be amazing all the time and be good. And you kind of have to tick all the boxes when it comes to being a good kid at home, being a good kid at school, being really good at studies. And in my case, we also had to be reasonably good at other activities. We had to be kind of like, oh, you know what? In our family, we do things this way.
So no pressure at all.
Yeah. So there was a lot of boxes that we had to tick growing up, a lot of expectations we had to meet, because there's always constant comparison. Okay. So I would say in I don't know how it is in other cultures, but I think in the Indian culture, people are constantly evaluating each other and sizing you up and saying, oh, how are you doing? And as a child, where do you how good are your kids, and how good are my kids, and how good are the neighbors' kids, and all of that.
Wow.
So yeah, so there's a lot of that going on, which I think is quite different here.
And how did that somehow shape you to where you are today, before the mindset?
So I think because I grew up in that kind of environment where there was, I would say, we were encouraged to not fail.
Okay.
Right? So failure was not an option. So I think to that point, I limited myself, and I would not take risks. I was very risk averse. I would say till 3 years back, I would have talked about myself as being a very risk averse person, and I would pitch for work or assignments or anything where I was sure of achieving.
Sure of success.
A high standard.
Yeah.
Sure of, I'm sure that it's going to succeed. So I think it's primarily because of the way I was raised.
Okay.
The fact that, if you're getting into something, make sure you can be good at it. I mean, like, don't go and try your hand at something and then realize that, oh, I'm not so great. So that would not really be, accepted very well. I mean, like, they're not going to throw me out of the house, but yeah.
Hopefully not.
At least not yet. So yeah, so I think that kind of shaped who I was to start with, being a high achiever, being very, very critical, very hypercritical about my own self, not really pausing to accept my, successes, because it was like, okay, I'm done with this now. Let's move on to the next level.
All right.
So I think, my upbringing shaped all of these things.
Role.
Yeah, till very recently when the shift happened. Yeah.
You mentioned two things which I want to tap on. Mm-hmm. First thing is failure.
Yes.
So, in your opinion, does failure or does the meaning of failure differ from, one culture to the next?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
So I think it's kind of like a spectrum.
Okay.
The way I see it. In some cultures, I think the standards are higher. Mm-hmm. And therefore, like if you fail, the impact is way more, Whereas other cultures are more forgiving. Okay. And they kind of allow you to fail, but the impact is softer.
So really it's about how we view failure in our own lens.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Some people view failure as something that's super bad maybe, and some people might view failure as something that's, a bit less of a burden.
Yeah, I mean, like they probably would allow you to kind of bounce back faster because the shame is not as great.
And speaking of shame, I think this is one of the worldviews that is very much highlighted in a lot of cultures where people are brought up, thinking that, okay, whatever I'm doing, is it bringing shame or is it bringing honor? And on that topic, I just also want to highlight the importance of just looking at shame and honor, how much we can play a role in, instead of, working towards allowing people to feel shame, we can work towards allowing people to feel honor. So their focus can be just, shifted when it comes to, okay, what can I do to bring honor, rather than, okay, what am I doing that brings shame to the culture and the place that I'm in.
Exactly.
And it's interesting that you brought it up, because I know that a lot of people find it very hard to either understand themselves when it comes to this point, or to even express it. But speaking of the mind shift that happened, you mentioned around 3 years ago.
Yes.
So what happened then?
So 3 years back, I stopped working for somebody else, and I started my own company. So
Ascend
Consulting, yes, that's right, my baby. So I think that's when I kind of went through kind of a transformation. When to start at the beginning, I was not interested in starting my own company. I was quite purposeless and clueless as to what to do with my life but I just knew that I had to get out of my corporate job, and it wasn't for me anymore. But I did not know what next. My husband, however, said, I think you'd be really great if you start your own company, and he was very insistent, and he's quite a pushing man.
He's a doctor, right?
Yes, he gets things done. So he pushed me to start my company, and I was not really in it. But I committed, right? I started the company, and it got going, right? The momentum started picking up, and I started learning more things about how to run a business, and simultaneously I also got into coaching. I went through my own coach training, and so, and that really transformed me. I would say the coaching and the business together, it highlighted a lot of blind spots which I had with regard to achievement, with regard to the fear of failure, with regard to being risk averse, all of these things. I would have thought of myself as a very confident person till then. And here I was, the owner of a business, but I was terrified of going and meeting people. And I thought of myself as somebody who's very, I'm a trainer. I stand in front of people and I can talk and present and everything. But here I was afraid to go and meet a client, introduce myself, and share what my services are, and ask for business.
So how did you break that barrier, considering your cultural values and, all of your misconceptions?
I think the way we were raised was we were taught not to ask.
Okay.
So asking is not something which we did growing up. It was not seen as a positive thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
appropriate. Like you don't ask for stuff. Like, oh my God, how can you go and ask somebody for this money or business or so asking was seen as a bad thing.
Okay.
Rather you like, oh, you show yourself and then it'll come to you. You show your excellence and then
Things will just come.
Yeah, the money will come or the recognition will come and so on. Well, ideally, I think it works, but in the real world, that's not always the case. You have to go out and ask for what you want, and
Correct.
and not being comfortable with that. It took me a while to kind of get over my fear. It was really fear of hearing the word no.
Very interesting.
So that's primarily what it was. I was just scared to go and meet people because I was scared. I would ask them for business and they would say, no, we don't have a requirement now. And I'd be like, oh my God, I'd be so crushed. I'd be heartbroken. Because for me, I was my business.
That's true. You're the face of it all.
Yeah, so then, it was kind of like a personal no, which I changed in my mindset in terms of, okay, that's not what it is.
So what did you do, or was there like a best practice that you would like to highlight, something that you did that, of course, slowly but surely you worked on that really shifted that?
So I would say it was more like a rude shock that I had to give to my system. So at the end of I think this was 2020, in December 2021, I decided to do a leadership workshop in Jan 2022.
Okay.
So I decided,
you were facilitating the workshop?
No, I was organizing it. So I was getting trainers from the UK to come and deliver the workshop, and I was targeting CEOs, CFOs, like C-suite and senior managers, and I wanted to do an event in the Crown Plaza for 50 people.
Okay.
And I went ahead and launched it at the end of December. Then I was like, okay, fine, now I need to go and get people to come and fill these seats. So I had no choice, Steph. I had to get out of my office and go and meet people, introduce myself, and sell those seats. So that, day in and day out, just going and meeting people over and over again, because people said yes, people said no, people said maybe, people said come back tomorrow. So, just doing that over and over again, it kind of gave me I think at the end of the month, I was like, yeah, I can totally do this. Mm-hmm. So it really broke that cultural mindset that I had that, oh, it's bad to ask. It's not appropriate for someone of my upbringing and my social status to go and ask someone for business.
Yeah.
All these things play in your head.
And once that mind shift happened, and with the coaching that you went through, and as a certified coach yourself, how do you kind of work around things now when it comes to your business, when it comes to your relationship, and when it comes to your kids as well?
So I think when it comes to business, I'm much more confident. I'm much more patient. I know that it's Oman, and things happen at a slower pace here when compared to, let's say, the UAE or India and so on. So I've taken that into account. I don't expect instant results or instant replies from clients. Scaled my expectations accordingly. When it comes to relationships as well, now that I know what my blind spots are, it's changed the way I interact with my spouse, with my children. I try to be less critical, less judgmental. I try not to,
pass on.
Pass on all that trauma to them. Be like this, be like that, be perfect. No. So I would say that I'm more open now, and I encourage them to take risks. I encourage them to explore. I tell them not to worry about failure. It's because I think it's important to fail a couple of times because it builds resilience.
Yeah.
It builds grit, and that's important.
It really does.
Because life happens, right? Everything's not going to go as per plan, and you need to be adaptable. You need to be flexible. So these are things which I didn't learn growing up, which I learned here in Oman. With the personal relationships that I've had here with people, with the business relationships that I've had, I've learned these things right here, which I didn't know maybe 20 years back when I was back home.
I know that's true, and I think a lot of people go through very similar situations where, especially when we have that mind shift, where we feel like, what just happened?
Yeah.
What just happened? But on that note, was there ever an aha moment that suddenly came out that showed you something completely different that you were not expecting to figure out about yourself, for example?
I think the aha moment was the fact that I am capable of risk. I am capable of, hearing the word no and still being okay with it and just, moving on.
And still knowing your worth.
Yeah, and it doesn't lower my worth in any way.
100%.
And it's okay when clients say that, oh, it's too expensive or the proposal doesn't matter, it's too high. It's fine, because not every fit is a good fit. And sometimes I think the universe deliberately takes away certain projects from your table because it's just not the right kind of projects for you. So I've learned that now in the last 3 years that, earlier I would have been like, oh my God, I would have just like gone over and over again. Why did that person say no? I mean, like, why did they not accept my proposal? Should I have changed this? Should I have changed that? I would have gone over 1,000,000 times. But now I'm like, hey, it was not a good fit. No worries, something else better is going to come my way. I'm just going to wait. So that realization, that patience is something very unlike the old me. Because I'm a doer and I'm not really the kind of person who likes to sit still and to wait. So yeah, life here in Oman is teaching me to wait because the pace of things here is slow and you cannot rush people here. Yeah. Whether it's in a personal level or on a professional level, we have to respect that there is a way that they do things here, and you respect the way and you show the respect, that's very, very important for any kind of client interaction. I truly believe that because even if you find that the person sitting opposite you doesn't have the capability that you were expecting, don't look down on him or her, Just the fact that you respect him or her for whoever they are at this point of time, they can sense it. Yeah. They can see it in your presence that you respect them, and vice versa. If you sense that, they can sense that if you are looking down on them, if there's disdain, even if you pretend to not show it, it still shows. The energy shows. Yeah. So I truly believe that. So I think any kind of interaction with any member of a different culture, the bare minimum you need to have is respect.
And I totally agree with this. And what I find interesting in what you said is how when you were being brought up, there were certain things that you probably couldn't do or couldn't ask when you were kind of in an environment where things were in like a fast-paced way versus when you kind of shifted, and figured out that, no, I am a doer and I want to get things done and I like to ask questions and I'm not afraid to take risks and, if failure comes, let it come, we'll bounce back. But the environment you're in kind of plays a different role.
Yeah, it kind of holds you back a little bit as well because I can't go like full throttle because that's not acceptable here. That would not be an appropriate interaction. You got to match the energy of the other person in the room, right? If I'm going to be talking 19 to a dozen and the other person's speaking very calmly and, it will be a hilarious conversation,
With all those different shifts, do you feel like there was an identity crisis at one point?
I think the identity is constantly evolving.
Okay.
And there are crises happening every, So for example, let me give you an example. Now, I've been in the Middle East for 20 years. Okay. All right. So I've been in Saudi, I've been in UAE, and finally here I am in Oman, 13 years in Oman. Even now, when I go into a business meeting, Steph, I'm still not sure, should I shake my hands? Should I put my hands out to shake or not? Especially if it's an Arab gentleman.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm like, I've had a rude shock years back when I first moved to Oman. I remember I was the head of HR for Asta, and I went to meet a doctor in Sohar. Now, he was a Jordanian gentleman, and I was meeting him for the first time. I had recruited him, but I was meeting him for the first time in person. So I was very excited to meet him because, we'd had several conversations and, all of that. So I went up to him and I said, oh, doctor, it's so nice to meet you in person. And I put my hand out. He stepped back and he said, I'm sorry, I don't shake a woman's hands. It's not right in my culture. I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my God, how did I not know this? How did I not know this? So since then, I kind of hold myself back a little bit. I'm always a little bit hesitant, should I not? So I think the easier thing to do is just wait till the other person offers the hand. Yeah. If they offer their hand, then yes, I shake it. If not, I don't. So something as simple as a handshake, a greeting, right? Is it differs, even though culturally there is a certain acceptance, they don't mind shaking hands now, with the person of the opposite sex. Some of them don't. Rather than me jumping into the fore and, say, come on, shake my hand.
I'm forcing you.
you gotta do, it's kind of like, you have people who are huggers and not huggers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I'm a hugger, 100%.
Same here. So what if you're not a hugger and you just hug the person and then the other person's like, whoa, what's with that? So I would rather that, just take a moment to be on the more conservative side when you're dealing with somebody of a different culture, because you don't know where that person is, what is the body language that they're comfortable with.
And again, the example you gave is as simple as a handshake, right?
Yeah.
There are much more things that, there are so many things that are much bigger, in a sense that people really might feel offended if you say a certain word, or if you do a certain act, or if you, speak in a certain way. But then on that note, what would be your advice for someone who has moved and for someone who has really kind of seen different shifts, regardless of just religion? But what advice would you kind of give to people who, are going to a new place or meeting new people for the first time, or they're not very sure of how, that culture works?
Yeah. So what I would recommend, because I do work with a lot of clients who are in transitions, like moving from one country to another because its spouses have moved. And so they move into a whole other culture. Like, for example, they move from South America to Doha, or they move from France to Saudi Arabia. So it's, it's very different culture. So what I always advise my clients is first try to understand, read up as much as possible about that local culture. You will find a lot of material online. Secondly, once you get there, see if you can find people who you can talk to actually, and because real life knowledge is priceless. You talk to maybe other expats like yourself who've been in the country for a while and they know the do's and don'ts, and say, hey, this is okay and this is not okay. So talk to people, get as much information as possible, and observe. Look around you. See how people are interacting with each other, how do they greet each other? How do they, what is the body language like? Is it a very close culture? Is it a very formal culture, informal culture? What is it? What kind of language do they use? And so I think a bit of research, a bit of, getting to know the other culture through observations and anecdotes, all of these things help. And, and I think it's important to be okay to make a few mistakes, right? Because
that's true.
You're not going to be able to get it right every time. So it's okay to apologize and say, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't know that was inappropriate. But next time you wouldn't make the same mistake. Like for me, I never jump in and show my hand to another Arab man ever. I have never done it till somebody offers me his hand. I'm like, all right then, So sometimes you just have to have a few, not so great experiences to kind of
in order to balance it out.
Yeah.
Okay. And speaking of the cultural mind shifts and knowing that you have two daughters who have somehow of an age difference as well.
Yes, almost a generation apart.
Almost a generation apart. So have you noticed any cultural mind shift kind of move from one generation to the, how does it differ from one generation to the next?
I would say
from you to your daughters.
Literally, it's like three generations. So there's me, and there's my older daughter who's 22, and there's my younger one who's 9. So
definitely a generation apart.
So we are literally almost like three separate generations, right? And we've all had very different upbringing. So I've been born. I was born and brought up entirely in India. My daughter has been born in India, my elder one, but she spent some time in India and then some time in the Middle East. Whereas my youngest one she's been born and brought up in Muscat. So each of us the start itself is very different. Now, as a mother, I am a different person than what I was 22 years ago. So the way I raised my older daughter is very different from the way I raised my younger one. So I would say I was a tougher mom. I was stricter, and I conformed by all the old norms, the way I was raised, because I thought that was the right way. That's the best I knew at that point of time, because I had her when I was in India, so I brought her in the typical Indian mindset.
Okay.
So that was 22 years ago, and so that meant the same things that you talked about. That you need to be a high achiever, that you have to be perfect. You can't. There's no room to fail. There's no room to explore. You got to get it right, and so all of that pressure, I passed it on to her. Poor thing.
What is she doing now?
She's all right.
Okay.
She's okay. So she's studying medicine in the UK. So she's fine. She turned out okay. Though she does say that, oh my God, the second one has it so easy.
Medicine is highly viewed in India, right? So.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So anyhow, but that was her choice. But when it comes to my second one, I'm very different as a mom because, for one, I'm way older than what I was when I had my younger one, my elder one. But I think more than the age itself, I'm a different person because of all my experiences.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of all the coaching that I have gone through myself, and the fact that I'm a business owner and I get to meet people from different backgrounds and cultures, and the fact that I've lived outside India for 20 years
Plays a very big
it
role.
really shaped me. It's changed me. Now, when I go back home and look at my friends who have stayed in the same place for the last 20 years, we have all started at the same starting point, but we're quite different now in the way we see things, in the way we view the world, in terms of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable.
Okay.
You know, so it's quite different. So when it comes to raising my second one, I'm more open now. I'm more curious and I'm less judgmental, and I'm okay with her trying on multiple options. And you know, so my elder one says that her standards are lower.
Oh my God.
She says, oh my gosh,
Oh,
she doesn't
no.
have to do anything to work. Yeah, but yeah, I think there's definitely a change in how I raise my children because of where I've been and what I've been shaped by,
Okay.
for sure.
And do you see any major difference in both of them? Or maybe let's look at it this way. Do you see any major difference between when your elder daughter was 9 versus your current daughter?
Definitely. They are miles apart, apples and oranges, I would say the difference is, because I would say my elder one was kind of like a copy of me at that time. You know, like, oh, be a good girl, do all the right things, be obedient, make mom and daddy happy, all of that stuff. You know, just everything was all about acceptance and approval, you know, very little room for exploration and risk-taking and, you know, all of failing.
Yeah.
It was not an option. Whereas from a younger one, it's like, you know, hey, you do your thing and, you know, it
I'm
doesn't
on
matter.
my own.
Yeah, so I encourage her. I push her to be independent. I push her to think for herself. I push her to, you know, go on, try it. If you don't like it, it's fine. If you know, you had a bad day at basketball, no problem. Pick yourself up and go again. So I think it's different. And they've turned out, I mean, they were different. I mean, my elder one, when she was 9, she was, I would say, probably meeker and more obedient and more less brave, I would say.
Yeah.
You know, whereas my younger one, she is much more comfortable with ambiguity, comfortable with not knowing.
And that's very nice for someone her age as well.
Yes, and that independence. Like, let me do it my way. Let me try it first, Mama. If I can't do it, I will call you. You know,
Okay.
I like to do it my way.
Yeah.
Or if I suggest a dress,
Leave it to me. Leave it to me.
you know. But whereas my older one would be like, fine, thanks. She would have just put it on because I gave it to her. I said, here, wear it. You know.
And then to what extent do your core values still come out now?
I think one of my most important values, I think from childhood, what has stuck on is respect.
And that's a very beautiful value.
Yes, and I believe that should be the basis of any relationship, whether it's with your spouse, with your children, with your friends, with your business colleagues, any interaction that you have. I think the baseline is you have to respect the other person. You have to see them for who they are 100%. Before you jump in with your judgments, and you know you're only seeing a spot of their life. What do you know about the rest of it? So I think respect is a value which was very strongly instilled in us as kids, as a very strong Indian value as well, in terms of, you know, like, for example, if back home, if you know, if we had a guest coming into the house, we would stand up. You know, that's a mark of respect. If you have an elder person walking into the room, we would stand up. So just a show of respect, you know. So respect is something which continues to be there in my life, right from childhood to now. And I think integrity, you know, like trying to do the right thing at all times, even if no one's looking and there's no one watching you over the shoulder. I mean, you can get away with a lot of stuff, you know, people won't even know, but I think it's important to kind of have have clear idea of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. I mean, of course, there are some gray areas, but as much as possible, try to keep it clean. You know?
And it's also very important to know your values, to know what are your core values, what do you want to keep from those values, and then with time, if there's anything that you want to change, then that's fine. But core values are super important because in the end of the day, they also define who you are as a person.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And then I think love is the third one, which has been there throughout. And, you know, I think that's important. Like, you need to love the people who you're around. You need to love the work that you do. You need to treat the community around you with love. I really believe the kind of energy that you put out is what you will get back from the universe.
Amen to that, 100%.
100%. So I think these are three values which have really stood the test of time. Yeah.
No, I agree, and I think love is something that, regardless of your background, regardless of where you're from, regardless of how you've been brought up, this is one value that if really people have, then judgment is taken away, criticism is taken away, and you just really kind of look at people from a very beautiful lens that gets you to see the beauty in other things or in other people or in other cultures.
Absolutely.
I do have one last question.
Sure.
Because I know that you started studying Arabic.
Yes.
So I would like to kind of know how you decided to start learning Arabic and how is that kind of affecting, your work?
Yeah, so I took the decision to start learning Arabic last March actually. So I realized, I kind of had like a goal in the beginning of last year that, I've been in the region for so long, for 20 years. I think I've spent more time in GCC than outside of it, than in India, to be honest. Yeah, pretty much. So, and I realized that I don't speak Arabic, and I was like, what a shame. I mean, like, come on. How can I be in a region where I don't speak the language? And it's a language that I'm familiar with because being a Muslim, we have to learn how to read the Quran. So we are familiar with the script and, we can read the Quran. But it's very different when you're talking. So that's how I embarked on this journey of learning how to learn Arabic. And Steph, it's been beautiful. It's been amazing because I realized that I actually know a lot more than I realized.
Because this is what happens when you tap into your potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've been around people who are speaking all around me, right? So words here, there, and I'm like, oh yeah, now I know what this means. Now, and now I've reached a point where I try to make conversation with anybody I can get.
Do you want to try or?
Maybe not. No. Yeah, so recently, like last month, I had to go to the oil field. It was my first visit on site for one of my clients. And majority of the gentlemen there were all Omani, right? So to just have like a simple conversation with them, like this is my name, and it's me Farzeen, Ana Muallima, and because I had gone there as a teacher, and Ahlan, and there's a small words and like Ashufik Kareeb and whatever. So the little things that I said, it made a huge difference to them.
It does.
Because they could see that I was making an effort to speak their tongue, and I think that is very powerful. You don't have to get it perfectly. Maybe the accent might not be right. Maybe my pronunciation. I'm not saying "ein" correctly.
Yeah.
So, but at least I'm trying. Because
you're not used to it.
Yes, but at least I'm trying, right? I'm trying to get my message across. Or, for example, yesterday I got stopped by the cops, and he said, "Atini license mulkiya." So I knew Atini means give it to me.
Yeah.
So these things, little things, and the fact that you can recognize.
Correct.
So I think that gives me so much joy, and it makes me feel so much more connected to the community and to the country. So I think language is powerful because
it is.
Just the fact that you're making an effort to communicate with a different culture, a different group of people, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think especially you guys, you come from a place where you have a lot of different dialects, right?
25, I think, we have. Yeah.
Wow. So I think that says enough.
Yes.
But just to wrap it up, if you were to kind of define culture in a sentence, what would that sentence be?
It's how we do things.
Okay.
Culture is how we do it here. That's amazing. What I say. Yep.
I like it. It's nice. Well, thank you, Farzeen.
Thank you
for being with us today, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you so much, Steph. Loved being here.
To recap on today's podcast, I just wanted to highlight the importance of mindset and Mindshift. Sometimes we're raised in a certain way where we just grow up to believe in certain things. And so it's very important to tap into our potential, to be curious enough to have that aha moment that might completely shift our mindset or shift our own perspective. Thank you for watching another episode of Journeys by Steph, and don't forget to subscribe and follow.